I was curious about, you know, like, I think maybe the second time I think I've seen that film, actually. And thinking back about, like, the trajectory that it takes to, like, you know, really have intersections of, like, being queer to non-conforming, API, and mental illness. I wonder what was, like, the most difficult part about making that for you?
So this was my 5th year at Santa Barbara. I had to kind of take a break from school and kind of work on my mental health. And I decided to do an independent studies class with a professor, Shamiz. I don't know if anyone knows her. She's also a filmmaker / ethnic studies professor that went to Stanford. But anyways, her and I were working on this film, and honestly, it was kind of an excuse to not take a regular class. If anyone has taken an independent studies class, you kind of create your own schedule. And I didn't really like writing, I really liked filming, especially about my naked body, but I'm just kidding, I'm kidding. And I think the most triggering, the most difficult part was it was very triggering. I mean, you're writing these stories out, and my professor was trying to guide me that way, but it also was like triggering because it was bringing up a lot of PTSD, a lot of past trauma, sexual assault, self-harm, and during that time, it was actually not that long ago when I was making that film, I attempted to, you know, take my life away 3 times in a month, and I almost was hospitalized, but I shouldn't have pushed myself to finish that film the way that I did, but I'm kind of glad that I did in a way because I didn't think it was gonna get big. My friend kind of forced me to submit it to the Oakland Pride Film Festival in 2013, and then that's when it kind of like offset this, my journey of doing, presenting these things. But yeah, it was very triggering, very traumatic. Every time I watch the film, I kind of have to sometimes step out of a space, or I get a little bit teary, or it's I don't know, I'm always gasping, or I'm always really like, I get a little bit of anxiety, kind of feeling that way right now, but it's kind of great to feel that I'm here now. I feel so much healthier. I mean, depression is something I'm going to battle with, I feel like, most of my life, but it's always a process.
Yeah. Have your parents, have you shown the film to your family?
This is so funny. So my twin is right here, and my older sister is right here. She has the same face as me, by the way. But anyways, I asked my sister, I was like, maybe I should bring my parents here, but Asian parents being naked, smoking weed, I don't know if that's a good idea, but they do know that I give kind of speeches here and there. They do know that I make film. My sister kind of helps translate to them that, you know, I'm doing great work within like the queer API space, so they're really supportive of that. So, but I don't intend to plan to show them this film.
Is there anyone else?
Yeah, this question's for Gerard.
RJ,
sorry. How was the film received by the mothers to be, and did they have a baby?
So, 2-part question: how did the mothers receive the film, and do they have a baby? Sky was able to attend the screening, and I brought my family there too. And just as it was awkward to tell them that I was donating sperm, it was just as awkward for them to meet each other. So, what can you do? But in terms of both Sky and Samala, like, they respected the process, and there's actually quite a bit that didn't make it into the film. There's just kind of conversations with them about what this represents for them and what this represents for me, and you know, other difficult conversation about like what signing that contract means. Like, it means like no contact with the child, you know. But then having, you know, it took me a while to kind of build this kind of fortress of defense of yearning to meet this child. But when I went to the fertility clinic to finally donate, they send you to a therapist first to check in and make sure you're okay with this. And that therapist like shook my foundations when she kept saying, if the child wants to meet you, the child is going to meet you. What are you going to do? So, I mean, of course I'm going to meet the child, but just the very nature of it, it's just a crazy process, and that didn't make it in the film. But in terms of whether or not they have a kid, they're still trying. In fact, I'm going to go in April to donate again. It's a process, but yeah, we're all still very encouraged and on the same page.
Can you say something about how there's so few donors that you were telling me earlier?
Oh yeah, that's right. I mean, the only reason why, well, not the, one of the reasons why they asked me was because there were virtually no Filipino donors in the national sperm banks. It's like less than 24. And then of that 24, 12 were in California, and of that 12, only 5 agreed to have the option to meet the child. So with the 5 choices that they had, none of them really stuck out. So Samala did a search within her networks, and somehow I was in that network. Yeah.
My question is for Nicole. I actually had quite a strong emotional response to the film, which really took me by surprise because the cinematography of it was presented in such a matter of fact way. So I was wondering if, and for me, the way I rationalized it is because if I have there's like parallel links in the main character and my cultural identity is the way we deal with language and family. But I was wondering if we can expand on what your relationship is to wanting to actually present your story.
Sure. So I had gotten to know Leon a little bit through my thesis film, but this was a project where I wanted to get to know him more intimately. We had spent a lot of time together filming some of his business sharpshooting things, but then we just started spending more time together and really talking about family and him sharing about his mom who had passed away from cancer and their relationship, about his gender identity and sort of talking about it and talking about how he felt like there was time and intimacy lost, having those discussions, having those disagreements with her when she was still alive. And so I think it ended up, like you say, sort of when he was like almost in tears explaining about how he wished that they had spent more time having fun and taking trips. But instead they were sort of he was going through the transition and they were having very frank and intimate conversations about that. I think that did come off really sort of up front and in your face, and I think stylistically, I didn't want to put any music under it. I did work with an audio sound person who the first run, there was sort of a soft tone sort of music under it, but I really just wanted it to be how it was in that intimate moment when he, sort of broke down and we had a really personal moment together. And I don't know if that's the part that you're specifically talking about, how you had an emotional response to it, but yeah, I mean, I think that I just presented it in the way that it was, and just in a very sort of traditional documentary style. And then he took the camera on his own and went to go see his grandmother, and he talked about his own. I think it was really cathartic for him because he got to address. I didn't propose those questions about do people ask if your family is trans or gay. That was something that he brought up on the train on just sort of interviewing himself on the way to see his grandmother. So I think that he got to, like you had mentioned, tell the story that he wanted to tell, even though I wasn't present, and even though he knew that I was going to see the footage and whether I was going to end up using it or not. I could, sort of tell, like, how did he want to present his story, and that's the part that I wanted to share. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, for me, like the part that I thought was kind of reacted the most to was the language portion and how broken the way he spoke Mandarin to his family, and how that really related to loss.
Yeah, he was really worried about how were they going to communicate, but he did know that his uncle was there, so they were actually speaking. His grandmother actually speaks Hokkien, which is a native Taiwanese dialect, and he doesn't understand Hokkien at all. He only speaks broken Mandarin, and then there was English and all spoken at the same time. And so when he brought the footage back, luckily his aunt and uncle live local in Los Angeles, so I actually went to their house. They translated everything for me because he still didn't even really know all the things that were being said. And so when I sort of discovered like, oh, all this rich conversation, you know, he's a horse and his grandma's a horse and his uncle's a horse, you know, that's really, really cool. Those were the parts that I, you know, really wanted to like hone in on, because I think that that's the cultural family values, you know, the things that, the stories that you don't really get to hear unless you're there.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that as one of the people who go back to the 60s and 70s and coming out, and now in my 60s, I realized at the time that it seemed impossible that the Asian experience was going to ever get beyond only being known on the inside. Well, for one thing, we were so small, and also we had so many cultural, language, ethnic, historical differences among us that there wasn't any way for one person to represent all of it. So I just didn't know it was going to take 25 years for another generation to grow up and have the education, skills, ability, and experience to represent themselves and all have to step forward on history at the same time. So I'm glad I'm around to see that, because the problem's been solved. Because we're just now representing ourselves, but we're doing it together, but giving enough spaciousness for our, you know, our particular experience to be there in all of its aspects. Because I remember one of the first organizing issues was Asian American versus what was then called foreign born, or international students, right? Because most people were just really babies. Like my parents came in 1926, and my mother came in 1946, and then everybody else came in after 65. And so you were just born, and you know, and certainly not gay yet, well maybe, but, but one of the first organizing issues at our big national meeting was what to do about this, you know, American-born versus foreign-born experience. And so we found ourselves actually dropping the term Asian American, because that was what we did in the 60s. We were the Chinese American, Filipino American, we were the Asian American movement. But when the lesbians and gays took it over, in the face of that real difference, that Asian American didn't fit. And so we just kind of dropped it, and then found ourselves becoming friends with people who are from our country of origin, but are cultural peers and not our parents, which is a different way to be Filipino, you know, or Japanese or Chinese. It wasn't through the lens of a generation, but it actually through peers. And then it just seemed like time for us to all get to know each other. So I think we've been an incubator for about 20, 25 years, and I'm glad now we can articulate it. There's people like PROCMAP and organizations and schools that that make it possible, and that the straight Asian community is not so bad about it, so that you can even now do it in Asian ethnic studies, where that wasn't the case before. You know,
Yeah,
so I just think it's good.
Yeah, I think it's great, because I think, you know, what we were pointing out is that there is, you know, when you were talking about legacy, that there is this legacy that's already been created, and your film charts that and makes that visible. But I think one of the great and refreshing things about many of the films that we've seen tonight is that there is a freedom in which you've made these stories, so that there isn't, you know, for my generation of filmmakers, there was kind of this burden of representation, because there were no representations of queer Asians in different communities. And I think that what these films showed to me was that that burden is no longer there, that there is a freedom to explore very subjective experiences, stories, narratives, and aesthetic experimentations and visual experimentations, and I think that's kind of was making for a very exciting queer Asian cinema culture. So, huge big round of applause to these filmmakers. we have to finish. So thank you so much.